Welcome to the Book of Days Project, February 19th. February 19th is a day on which was born Nikolai Copernicus, astronomer, in 1473, Henry Frederick, Prince of Wales, in 1594 in Stirling Castle, Roderick Murchison, geologist, in 1792. Dead on this day, Erasmus Reinhold, astronomer, 1553. The Emperor Decimus Albinus, killed in 198 on the Rhone River. This is a feast day of Saint Barbatus, Bishop of Benevento, 684. Today, Chambers refers to Henry, Prince of Wales. It is blessed to be in promise rather than after all the blots and mischances of performance. We naturally credit the young dead with much which might never have been realized. Nevertheless, in the early death of Henry, Prince of Wales, there is no room to doubt that the national bewailment was just. All accounts concur in representing him as a youth of bright talents, most generous dispositions, and the noblest aspirations. At 16, he had the figure, the proportions, and the sentiments of a full-grown man. With the love of study which belonged to his father, he possessed what his father entirely wanted, a love of manly military exercises. In riding, in archery, and the use of arms, he was without a superior. He studied shipbuilding and the whole art of war with as much zeal as if he had no taste for elegant learning. When at Christmas 1609 the romantic spectacle called his Barriers was presented in the banqueting house at Whitehall, when he and 6 other youths met each in succession 8 others at pike and sword play, all clad in the beautiful armor of that period, Henry was remarked, to the surprise of all, to have given and received 32 pushes of pike and about 360 strokes of sword in one evening. No small task, ladies and gentlemen. It was in the midst of active study and exercise, and while the nation was becoming fully aware of the promise he gave as their future ruler, this accomplished prince was seized with a fever, consequence apparently of the 2 violent fatigues to which he occasionally subjected himself. What immediately affected him to a fatal illness seems to have been his playing at tennis one evening without his coat. Children, beware, be warned. In the simple act of stripping off and laying aside that coat was involved an incalculable change of the current of English history. For had Henry survived and reigned, the country would probably have escaped a civil war, and who can say in that event how much our national destinies might have changed, for good or evil. During the 12 days of the prince's illness, the public mind was wrought up to a pitch of intense anxiety regarding him, and when on one occasion he was thought to have yielded up the ghost, the cry of grief went out from St. James's Palace into the street, and was there repeated and spread by the sympathizing multitude. All that the medical skill of that age could do was done to save so valuable a life, including some applications that sound strangely in our ears. For example, pigeons applied to the head, and a split cock to the feet. Sir Walter Raleigh sent from his prison in the Tower a quintessence, which he believed to be a wonderful power, and it did give the prince the only approach to a restoring perspiration which he had had. But all was in vain. Henry died on 6th of November, 1612, when 3 months less than 19 years of age. As a historical event, his death ranks with a very small class in which deceased royalty has been mourned by the nation's heart, the deaths of the Princess Charlotte and of the Prince Consort Albert being amongst the other instances. The national admiration of this young man is shown in some quaint lines hitherto inedited in the Burleigh manuscript. Lo, where he shineth yonder, a fixed star in heaven, whose motion here came under none of your planets heaven. If that the moon should tender the sun her love and marry, they both would not engender so great a star as Henry. 1617. Let's read about the dream of the Good King Gontran. The late Hugh Miller, in his interesting work My Schools and Schoolmasters, when speaking of a cousin named George, says some of his Highland stories were very curious. He communicated to me, for example, beside the broken tower, a tradition illustrative of the Celtic theory of dreaming, of which I have since often thought. 2 young men had been spending the early portion of a warm summer day in exactly such a scene as that in which he communicated the anecdote. There was an ancient ruin beside them, separated, however, from the mossy bank on which they sat by a slender runnel, across which there lay, immediately over a miniature cascade, a few withered grass stalks. Overcome by the heat of the day, one of the young men fell asleep. His companion watched drowsily beside him, when all at once the watcher was aroused to attention by seeing a little indistinct form, scarce larger than a The humblebee issued from the mouth of the sleeping man, and leaping upon the moss, moved downwards to the runnel, which it crossed along the withered grass stalks, and then disappeared amid the interstices of the ruin. A bumblebee out of the mouth while dreaming. Alarmed by what he saw, the watcher hastily shook his companion by the shoulder and awoke him. Though with all his haste, the little cloud-like creature, still more rapid in its movements, issued from the interstice into which it had gone, and flying across the runnel, instead of creeping along the grass stalks and over the sward as before, it re-entered the mouth of the sleeper, just as he was in the act of awakening. "What is the matter with you?" said the watcher, greatly alarmed. "What ails you?" "Nothing ails me," replied the other, "but you robbed me of a most delightful dream. I dreamed I was walking through a fine rich country, and came at length to the shores of a noble river, and just where the clear water went thundering down a precipice, there was a bridge all of silver, which I crossed, and then entering a noble palace on the opposite side, I saw great heaps of gold and jewels, and I was just going to load myself with treasure when you rudely awoke me, and I lost all." The above story is by no means uncommon in the Highlands, and the writer has frequently heard it related by an old native of Ross-shire, who firmly believed it as an indisputable evidence of the immortality of the soul, the little indistinct form being assumedly the soul of the man, in full life, sense, and motion, while his body was wrapped in the death-like torpor of sleep. And he further stated that in the Highlands, under peculiar circumstances, a little form has been seen leaving the mouths of certain persons at the last gasp of life. Keep the bumblebee in the belly, folks. It is a curious fact that a similar legend, having, however, a much more practical conclusion, is related of Gontran, the good king of Burgundy, who lived, reigned, and died so far back as the 6th century. One day, Gontran, weary with the chase and attended but by one faithful squire, laid himself down to rest near a small rivulet and soon fell asleep. The squire, while carefully guarding his royal master, with great astonishment perceived a small beast, bastion, emerge from the king's mouth, and proceed to the bank of the rivulet, where it ran up and down for some time, seemingly wishing to cross the water, but unable to do so. Thereupon the squire, determined to see the end of the adventure, drew his sword and lay it over the stream from bank to bank. Interesting. The little animal, seeing this improvised bridge, ran over and speedily disappeared in a small hole at the foot of a hill on the opposite side. After remaining there for a very short period, it returned along the sword and into the king's mouth. Soon after, Gontran, awakening, said that he had just had a most extraordinary dream, in which he thought that he had crossed a foaming torrent on a bridge of polished steel, and entered a subterranean palace full of gold and jewels. The squire then relating what he had seen, the king, on his return to his palace, summoned all the learned men in Burgundy, and having stated the whole occurrence, demanded of them the immediate interpretation thereof. For once in the world's history, the opinions of the savants was unanimous. They declared that there could be no reasonable doubt on the matter. A large treasure was indeed concealed under the hill, and its existence being by a special miracle disclosed to the king. He alone was destined to be its possessor. Gontran immediately set a great number of men to work. The hill was undermined and the treasure discovered. Receiving this treasure as an especial gift of Providence, Gontran devoted the principal part of it to purposes of charity and religion. He founded hospitals for the poor and ecclesiastical edifices for the clergy. He made extensive roads through his kingdom that the poor might be the better enabled to perform pilgrimages, and covered the shrine of Saint Marcel à Chalon-sur-Saône with a thick layer of beaten gold. Still further to commemorate the wonderful event, the king ordered that the hill should ever be termed Mount Tresor, the name which it bears at the present day. Thank you for joining us. Dream well. Dream with your mouth closed, then opened, then closed. Adieu.